Okay, we're continuing through this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers, going in alphabetical order. So now we're at Robert Frost. Robert Frost was born in the 1800s. He's born in America. His father was from England, his mother was from Scotland. You know, he's a real bright guy. He tried his hand at being a school teacher. He tried his hand at being a farmer. What he really wanted to be, was a poet. And he did write a lot of poetry. And he actually won like 4 Pulitzer Prizes and stuff. Okay, and I like him because I remember reading his poems when I was a kid, and they kind of inspired me that, poetry could be beautiful. He had a pretty rough, sad life. A lot of his children died very young. His father died when he was 11 years old of tuberculosis. His mother died of cancer when he was 26 years old. And that's a lot of times how life kind of was for a lot of people, difficult or poor. He says, the ear is the best reader. A poem begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a lovesickness. And part of what that's about is you need emotion. You need emotion to generate energy. Like I know, like if something happens to me in the daytime, if I'm emotional about it, like I'm happy, sad, or pissed off about it, that's a good thing to make a video about. I know that if I feel emotional about it, there's a good chance a lot of other people will feel emotional about it. So you can feel it in yourself, what's most likely to resonate. Okay, Robert Frost continues. No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. Yeah, if you feel it. As a writer, one of the best things to go by is what you feel. If you get that gut emotional feeling, this is important, this should be said, then people will probably care about it. Let's see. Oh, and it's a little bit like the Horace quote, the ancient Roman. If you wish the reader to weep, you must weep first. Okay. Robert Frost. Education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or losing your confidence. Yeah, having self-control, that's a key for success in life, because a lot of times people are going to say stuff that pisses you off and you don't like, and also they're going to initially BS and lie, and you're going to think, oh gee, my own idea or my own thing stinks. But a lot of times you find out once you get older with more experience, very often they're lying or BSing. So you have to learn to listen, give them a chance to speak, but keep your skepticism. Okay, he says, I am not your teacher, I am an awakener. The only education worth anything is self-education. Yeah, most of what's useful is stuff you learn on your own, also from experience, Like when I think back about what was best about my medical education, the best part was the clinical work, seeing interesting things happen. Let's see. Education is hanging around until you've caught on. Part of that is, I like that quote only in the sense that a lot of times you have to stay with a problem. And that's why you want to minimize distractions in your life. Minimize social media, minimize cell phones, minimize things that distract you from learning what it is you're trying to learn. Because if you focus your energy for a prolonged amount of time on something, you'll often figure it out. It's actually kind of easy. A layperson very easily, if they decide they want to understand diabetes, all they got to do is spend about 2 months of serious study, and even less than that, 1 month. They'll know more than a fellowship-trained endocrinologist about diabetes. There'll be some things that they won't know. They won't know how to manage meds as well, because the fellowship-trained endocrinologist does that every day. But they'll understand the pathophysiology, the diet, of how to prevent and treat it much better than 99% of endocrinologists. And it's the same like that for lots of medical things. Okay, all the fun's in how you say the thing. If you don't know how great this country is, USA, I know someone who does, Russia. Yeah, and that's again how I grew up. When I grew up, America was really proud of who it was, and the word proud was a good thing. And it meant, we're America. We're the best, okay? We're not a bunch of stinking commies, okay? And I had friends that were world and Olympic champions that wrestled and competed against the Russians. And that's what they all called them. They said, oh, those, commies. They actually kind of like some of the athletes and some of the people, but, it was pretty clear. We come from the superior free country. They come from the commie shithole, okay? Good fences make good neighbors. That's more true now than ever before. And failure to understand that leads to the loss of a country. All the Western countries are being destroyed right now. Everybody knows that. They're all being intentionally destroyed to get rid of Christianity because the rich and powerful think that that's the only obstacle to bringing back slavery. That's what's happening in the world. It's rather obvious. If you read about it, this is not like my thought. This is well known by anybody who knows what's going on. Okay, half the world, there's Robert Frost continuing, half the world is composed of people who have something to say and can't, and the other half of the people who have nothing to say and keep on saying it. Well, yeah, what that's all about is, regular people have very little voice, and when they do get on the internet or other places, Twitter and stuff, they tend to be shadow banned. versus some, really rich billionaire can promote the most completely untrue garbage and put a lot of money into promoting it so it gets heard. It gets even accepted as true when it's absolute nonsense. Okay, Robert Frost continues. You don't have to deserve your mother's love, but you do have to deserve your father's. Yeah, fathers are a lot tougher to please than mothers. Mothers give you unconditional love, which you need, but fathers give you objective reality, which you also need. Sometimes they do it a little too tough. Like my dad, he should have helped me more. He's always demanding things from me, but he should have helped me a little more. But don't get me wrong, he was a good guy. He screwed up on a bunch of stuff, but he was good. He meant well. Never lied to me. Home is the place where they have to take you in when you go there. Yeah, thank God there's at least one place like that. A mother takes 20 years to make a man of her son, and then another woman makes a fool of him in 20 minutes. Yeah, that's another thing for boys. Boys really should, all the nonsense they waste their time learning in school, they really need these dating coaches to understand women, because women are very tricky. I one time joked it's like God's invention to empty a man's wallet. They're not like men. They don't think like a guy does. And so a guy walks in there thinking this is going to be like something out of one of those romantic movies. He's in for something very different. And the modern women nowadays are not as nice as they used to be, like my mother. And don't get me wrong, it's worse now for young guys than it is than ever before. And I hope, only a return to Christian ethics is going to save the country and save the institutions of this country. All the institutions are being degraded by all this modernism. Okay, getting back to these quotes of Robert Frost. He says, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. So I used to love those poems. And again, it was inspired. When you see something good and beautiful, you think, well, gee, maybe I could someday do something like that. And it makes you think reading is worthwhile. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. And we read all this stuff back when I was in grade school and high school for this one. And that was good. They still taught some real stuff. Okay, I remember this being one of my favorite classes, English literature. I still remember my high school teacher in English literature. I remember both of them. I liked them. This is one of the few things I liked in high school. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. Okay, so that's it for Robert Frost. Good stuff. Okay, we're going to do Frost, Frye, and Frye. So the next Frye we're going to do is Stephen Frye. Stephen Frye is this English writer. He's got a very high IQ. He's a very intelligent guy. He's written some clever books. He wrote The Ode Less Traveled about writing poetry, and it was a good book. He wrote a book about Greek mythology called Mythos, and it was also a good book. It was well written. It was clever. He went into some details, some obscure stuff about the myths that was good. He does use it a little bit, though, as a soapbox to promote homosexuality, and he tries to constantly emphasize that when he talks about Greek mythology. So it's not a one for the little kids. But he's clever and he's funny. And what are some other things about him? One thing I don't like is, though, he really pushes atheism pretty hard in a lot of the stuff that he writes and does. And I don't like that, because when I see a Hollywood person pushing atheism, what I think of is, Soviet Russia. Okay, for good reason. There's lots of people that haven't figured out their faith, their religion, their thoughts, and that's an individual thing. But when people publicly push atheism and say that it's good and it's right, watch out, because that's often pushing communism. If you know politics and you know philosophy, that's an important thing to know. And Ayn Rand had said, and Ayn Rand's very different. Ayn Rand's very different. I love Ayn Rand, and I'm not going to get into Ayn Rand right now, but Ayn Rand had said philosophy is the most important subject because philosophy determines one's attitude towards everything else. And I actually think Ayn Rand is a closet Christian. Believe me, I read a lot of Ayn Rand. We're not going to get into that right now. But what I'm getting at is, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, what is it that made it possible for Russia to kill 65 million Christians? It was atheism. Because atheism is used as justification to demonize Christians. And they are seen as the obstacle towards bringing slavery back into the world, which is what the really rich want to bring back into the world. And the only thing holding them back is Christianity. So that's why that is priority number one, to get rid of it. Okay, what else about Stephen Frye? He says, the only reason most people don't know much is because they do not care to know. They are incurious. Incuriosity is the oddest and most foolish failing that there is. And yeah, for most people, they figure, why bother learning or getting educated? All I need to do is this, and so they don't ever bother with it. But they miss out on a lot in life. And then they're always bored. Okay, somebody who's interested in reading and learning and educating themselves, they've always got something to do. Okay, Stephen Frye's next quote: "You are who you are when no one is watching." Okay, now here's like a typical thing of his claiming there's no God. How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It is not right. It is utterly, utterly evil. What should I respect? Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world so full of injustice and pain? And so that's sort of like the question of evil. And the usual answer to that is, it's a toleration of one evil for a greater good, and the greater good is free will. Okay, so that's the standard argument to that question, and that's it's a relevant question. Okay, and that's been put forth by others like Dostoevsky and anybody who's actually really seriously thought about it. Okay, and then he says, books are no more threatened by Kindle than stairs by elevators. Homosexuals are not interested in making other people homosexuals, but homophobes are interested in making other people homophobes. Well, okay, that's a whole other big thing, and LGBTQ is over-promoted tremendously in proportion to, and what he's also saying though is not completely true, because that whole movement has gotten to the point where it's castrating children in grade school before they're ready to make those decisions, and it's gotten to the point where there's chemicals being put into the food, into the water, that are feminizing people. I've given lectures on all that stuff, so it's not like there's not more going on here. There is, and I don't want to get into all that, and I do think that, like I said, he's done some good things, and he's a very bright guy, and he actually is quite funny at times, but he's also part of pushing a sinister agenda that I believe leads to agenda than than the word side, okay? There was more. This was more than skill. This was artistry. That's from this book, Mythos. If ignorance is bliss, then why aren't there more happy people in the world? Stephen Frye. Okay, the next Frye, so there's two Fryes in this little series, is Northrop Frye. Northrop Frye is a writer. I think he's Canadian. He wrote a couple good books. He wrote a really good book about the Bible, about understanding the Bible and all the major themes in the Bible. I thought that's why I started liking him, because that was a great book. Northrop Frye lived from 1912 to 1991. He says, the book is the most efficient technological instrument for learning that has ever been devised by the mind. Yeah, I like a book. You can take it into the bathroom. You can read it anywhere. You can carry it with you in your backpack. Okay, the Bible is the world's greatest work of art, and therefore has primary claim to be the title of God's Word. The Bible is the archetype of Western culture. The Bible provides the basis for most of our art, our major art, for Dante, for Milton, Michelangelo, Raphael, Bach, the great cathedrals, and so on. So I like what he says. It is the archetype of Western culture. We say word Western civilization, but what Western civilization really means is Christianity, Christian culture. Okay, that's what it really means. And if you say, like, why would somebody go to Europe? To see the cathedrals, to see the Sistine Chapel, okay? What made Europe great? Christianity, It's also the spot where the scientific method arose. Where? Out of the Catholic Church, okay? Most of what's best comes from Christianity. Yeah, there's more to it than that, but that's most of what is best. And that's all being destroyed. And so once that's destroyed, what are you going to have left? Another third world crap hole, okay? To grow up in ignorance of what is in the Bible or in Homer is as crippling to the imagination as being deprived of the multiplication table. Okay, he says, one can distinguish the sacred book, the Bible, from secular literature. Secular literature can be written with an imaginative language, with myth and metaphor, but it doesn't provide a mode to adopt as a way of life. Whereas the object of the writers of the Gospels was to encourage people in the imitation of Christ. They wanted to make a model of the life of Christ for the person who was reading the Gospel. Okay, that's sort of paraphrased. That sentence is what I remembered from him. We can save ourselves only through an established cooperative church. The church has the power to save the world when it itself is saved. Until then, grace will work largely outside the church. Yeah, the church has been taken over by the left and destroyed, okay? Catholic Church, they have to allow married men and allow noble masculinity in there. It's always going to suck. They have to refuse to go with 503 exemption. That'd be nice if they got rid of 503 exemption, but until they do, it's going to suck. Because you need noble masculinity to make it good. Currently, yeah, the new pope is another piece of crap, Antichrist, so it's real sad. Okay, he continues, Northrop Frye, there is no alternative to Christ except Antichrist, and the forms of Antichrist are king, inspired dictator, or infallible counselor. Art proves that examples and illustrations are more powerful than doctrines and precepts. The way I begin a book is to write detached aphorisms into a preliminary notebook. 95% of the work it consists of connecting these into a continuous narrative. Okay. Drama will never get better than King Lear. King Lear is it as far as drama is concerned. The aim of education is to be able to distinguish illusion from reality. Now that's a good one, yeah. You got to deal with things in the real world and figure out how to make sense of them and get to the truth. That's useful because you got to make your decisions based on what you think is true or not. And Ayn Rand has a great quote about that. Man needs philosophy. He cannot escape from this. And he needs to learn how to distinguish truth from falsity. And if he doesn't learn how to do that, then he bases his decisions on falsity and he becomes his own destroyer. So yeah, if you can't learn how to understand nutrition, for example, then you'll be a chump. You'll eat a high-fat diet with a lot of animal foods and oils, and you'll plug up your arteries and you'll get sick. So you need to know what is true. And I think all these people on there intentionally lying to the pros are doing something really bad. Okay, Northrop Frye. The story of loss and regaining identity is, I think, the framework of all literature. I soon realized that a student of English literature who does not know the Bible does not understand a great deal of what is going on in what he reads. Yeah, you have to know the Bible and Greek mythology in order to be, skilled at reading English literature. Come on, it's what it's based on. So much of it, it has continuity in one way or the other with a lot of that stuff. Okay, a student of English literature who doesn't know the Bible doesn't know what's going on in English literature. The Bible should be taught so early and so thoroughly that it sinks straight to the bottom of the mind, where everything that comes along can settle on it. That's pretty common in the great scholars. They will tell you that. Like John Ruskin, he said the reason he became a great writer was because he spent so much time reading the Bible with his mother. Northrop Frye continues. The first thing to be laid on top of biblical training is, in my opinion, classical mythology, which gives us the same kind of imaginative framework of a more fragmentary kind. Here again, there are all sorts of incidental or secondary reasons for the study. The literature of all modern Western languages is so full of classical myths that one hardly knows what is going on without some training in them. But again, the primary reason is the shape of the mythology. The classical myths give us much more clearly than the Bible the main episodes of the central myth of the hero, whose mysterious birth, triumph, marriage, death, and betrayal, and eventual rebirth follow the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. So basically, yeah, I would say, if you want to be well educated, you have to know the ancient Greeks. You can't get around it. The ancient Greeks are the most extraordinary thing. They burst out of all the BS and misery and squalor and cruelty of mankind. Up shot out the ancient Greeks, about 2,500 years ago. They were just sort of a miracle of freedom and genius. Then you should know about the Romans, mostly for bad reasons. They were brutal thugs, like a typical Eastern dictatorship, other than a few bright lights, like Cicero and Horace and Seneca and some of what Augustus did and some of the others, some of what Aurelius did. Okay, but anyways, and then you got to know Italian Renaissance. This is at a minimum, and then you should know what happened in the 1900s. Okay, Northrop Frye continues. Nursery rhymes are the best possible introduction to poetry. Nursery rhymes are the only really popular poetry we have. Millions of people know Hi Diddle Diddle and Jack and Jill who've never read a line of Shakespeare. He continues, George Orwell wrote The Inferno about the 20th century. However inferior he may be to Dante in all literary respects, he excels him in one point. His hell is a real hell, a dreadful state of torment that could last forever, and yet it is potentially here now. Yeah, that's what people don't understand. Russia made hell on earth, okay? It's like the work of the devil. It's so evil. It's so bad. Regular person doesn't really understand Russia because they haven't studied it, okay? Study it. It's like one of the most valuable things you'll ever study. And once you study what happened in Russia in the 1900s, you will no longer think so kindly of the animal rights people and the environmental movement. And you'll see what they have to do with Soviet Russia in the 1990s, this idea of starving people. It's a common thing done by commies. Northrop Frye, only a great genius can answer the simplest questions in science and philosophy because it takes a great genius to become aware of them as questions. Yeah, only a genius of a fish recognizes that it's swimming in water. Okay, let's see. For the last 250 years, practically every great comic dramatist in English literature has been an Irishman. Yeah, like Oscar Wilde, and there's a bunch of other ones, Bernard Shaw, etc. There's only one way to permanently degrade mankind, and that is to destroy language. Yeah, and that's a lot of what has done. That's a lot of what the left does, is they take a word that, meant something honorable and good, and they distort it, or they take a word, a euphemism, and to make it sound nice, but it's really something evil, like, gender-affirming surgery for children. That means to castrate children. That is evil. They are not ready for that. Okay? Northrop Frye. Nobody is capable of free speech until he knows how to use language, and such knowledge is not a gift. It has to be learned and worked at. So anyways, those are the quotes of Frost, Stephen Frye, and Northrop Frye. Hope you found them interesting. Okay, we're continuing through this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom. Uh.